The Charlotte Hornets give us all a little bit more clarity around Mark Williams' injury. Miles Bridges is defending the team from accusations of being soft, and I dip my hand deep into the sicko satchel once again. That's all today on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
This is Locked On Hornets. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Thanks so much for making Locked On Hornets your first listen every day. We are free and daily wherever you get podcasts. That includes your favorite podcast app and YouTube, where you can see my bright, shining face this morning. No Walker Mail alongside me. You can catch him on WFNZ 12 to 3 each weekday. Maybe not today. He's still feeling a little bit under the weather. We'll see if he's just playing hooky from Locked On Hornets or if he feels good enough to get on the radio. You'll have to check him out on the text line and give him some grief about that. But he should be back tomorrow. So that's the good news. The bad news is you've got me for today. But I've got some thoughts. And I get the microphone all to myself, and so I'm going to dive into those thoughts on Mark Williams, on accusations that this team is soft, and much, much more from the Sicko Satchel. You can get all of my Hornets thoughts on my substack, Every Hornets Boxscore, at everyhornetsboxscore.com, or on our new Sicko Brigade, our subtext, joinsubtext.com/Locked On Hornets. So the Hornets did give us a Mark Williams injury update. And that is this. On Twitter, they say, Hornets center Mark Williams will continue to rehab his low back injury as he works towards his return to play. Williams will be listed as out for one additional week, and updates on his status will be provided as appropriate. So just to kind of go back to the history of all of this, he injures his back almost a month ago, more than a month ago, in a game against Brooklyn. Plays one more game, and then is out for what they call a lower back contusion, low back bruise, then tries to come back, plays about 19 minutes, exits the game early, and has been out ever since. So it was called a lower back contusion. I don't know if it's going to continue to be called a lower back contusion, but that tweet there was low back injury. So is it a contusion? Is it something more? They're going to continue to evaluate it. He's going to continue to rehab it. I've said many times on the show already that when it comes to big men in the league, you cannot mess around with lower back injuries, especially when these guys are young. It could limit what they are able to do for the rest of their career. It could be potentially career ending. So I understand why they are being careful, but it is frustrating not seeing him out on the floor, and it's less not seeing him out on the floor and what that means for the Charlotte Hornets, right? Because they did not come into the season with a legitimate third string center. They signed Nick Richards to the 3-year deal to be the backup center to Mark Williams, but they never really figured out, because Richards was that third big behind Williams and Plumlee, but they never really figured out that situation coming into this season. They have Nathan Mensah, who, to his credit, has played hard, but is inexperienced, is undersized for that position. Like it's not a surprise that the Hornets still struggle to rebound when he's on the floor. They still struggle to defend the rim when he's on the floor. And so that's why it's frustrating. It's also frustrating because Mark Williams was having a good second year heading into this. There were obviously things he needed to improve on, and so that frustrates you too, because these are opportunities, these are games that he's missing early in his career that would help catapult him through his next couple of seasons, which are the really important seasons, because that's for the player and the team. For the player, it's the leap. For the team, it's to make the decision, okay, are we going to move forward with this player on the first opportunity that we have to re-sign them, or are we going to move on? And so you lose all of that opportunity, to make some of those evaluations as long as he's sitting out. So but that's a little bit of a weird update, that we've gone from a lot of doubtful to finally being out to now this situation where we're going to evaluate him essentially week to week. And I don't have any indication as to whether that means he's any closer to getting back. I think it's probably like a lot of these injuries that the Hornets have had lately is more of a feeling thing. Like, we're going to go out there and see, how is it super tight when he warms up? Is there any kind of pain? And if there is, then they're going to back off and try to get him to a place where he's 100%. But it's just one of many injuries the Hornets are dealing with right now. The latest injury report includes Mark Williams being out. LaMelo Ball with a right ankle injury continues to be out. Gordon Hayward, left calf. Frank Ntilikina still recovering from the tibia injury that he sustained in the preseason of this year. 2 upgrades, P.J. Washington and Cody Martin, were both out for the game against Chicago. P.J. Washington has been upgraded to doubtful with a right foot sprain. Get the doubtful cannon back. It's back. We've gone from out now. We're back to doubtful for P.J. Washington, and Cody Martin with that strained groin going to questionable at this point. So hopefully with the Cody Martin situation, it was something where there was a little bit of a strain, a little bit of a tweak, and, you rested for a couple of days now because they had 2 days off going into that Chicago game. Now you get another day off going into this Sacramento game. So hopefully he'll be available to play because the Hornets are short-staffed right now, and it is affecting their ability to close out these games as we saw against Chicago. So I'll have a preview of the Sacramento game coming up, but I just wanted to kind of stick around on these injuries a little bit because Miles Bridges brought something up after the game against Chicago. Here's the quote from Miles Bridges asked about all of these injuries that the Hornets are dealing with right now. He said, quote, "It's tough to see Mark not playing, Melo not playing. All the guys that's out, I feel like people outside, they get the wrong impression like we are just soft. We are not playing. But no, those guys are doing a great job of rehabbing and they want to play. So I don't know. It's just tough for us." And there is that impression that this, well, I think there are 2 impressions from the outside, from fans, from people who comment on Twitter. And, when Miles posts something, I'm sure people are in his comments. And I've seen 2 things in particular. One, that like what's taking so long, which I think behind that is what's taking that player so long to get back. There is this element of like, are they sort of slow playing this, afraid of getting hurt again, so they don't want to play through anything? Are they soft? And then this other element of like, what's the deal with the training staff? Like how are all of these injuries happening? What's the training staff doing? And we've talked about the training staff issue before, but those are the 2 things that I've seen on them being soft. I don't think any of these players are soft necessarily for trying to rehab through these injuries. And I'll take Miles at his word that he's seeing these guys in the training room trying to get back as quickly as possible. But there is some nuance here. It doesn't have to be, well, they're soft or they immediately come back as soon as possible, even if they're a little bit hurt. One wonders with some of these injuries, if these players were playing on the Miami Heat or the Boston Celtics and they were playing for rotation spots, they were a little bit deeper in the rotation, in danger of being out of the rotation, or if they were playing on one of those teams and they had something to play for, that there was a legitimate playoff run to be had, if these players would accelerate the timeline. Or do they look at this and go, look, the team is, even if everybody magically, even if you snapped your fingers right now and brought everyone back off the injury list, even if that magic were to happen, would this team be ready to compete in the Eastern Conference? And the answer is no. No, because look, Vegas didn't have this team winning 40 games going into the season. Vegas had this team as one of the bottom 3 or 4 teams in the Eastern Conference, and the Hornets came into the season fully healthy. So there was stuff that this team was going to have to figure out in order to beat those Vegas expectations. If all of those guys were to come back immediately, they would still have to figure all of that stuff out. Steve Clifford has alluded to that look, you got to get these guys back so then you can figure out a way to play. Then you can figure out rotations, which guys need to play with which guys, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, try to attenuate for some of those weaknesses and really accentuate the strengths. They've had no opportunity to do that. So, how many games would that take? Would that take 10, 15? You lose more than half of those? And then all of a sudden it is a situation where you're like, well, now the math doesn't work anymore. Now it doesn't work anymore. Now they're completely out of it. And now the trade deadline is breathing down your neck. And now you're a new ownership group that is needing to evaluate the roster, the front office, the coaching staff, and you have your first opportunity. The trade deadline will be the first opportunity that this ownership group will be presented with options for change. There will be teams that call about certain players. Now, will those teams offer something that is particularly enticing to the ownership group and to the front office? That still remains to be seen, but they will get calls because Terry Rozier has been playing enough to generate interest around the league. And Gordon Hayward's contract, even though, I think the injury, we've said this for 3 or 4 years now, the injury right around this time will suppress the market for his services, but the contract is still enticing. So there will be offers. It will be their first opportunity for change. So, if that's the situation, if that's the situation that the team is in, if you are one of these players and you're young and you've got your whole career ahead of you, and that career may or may not include being on the Charlotte Hornets, do you risk coming back immediately and possibly risk re-injury in order to save a season that I think it's pretty clear that is almost lost? Now, it's almost lost in terms of the result, in terms of being able to get to the playoffs. Still plenty to play for. And that would be my argument to these young players. Hey, you've got a lot to play for. If at all possible, to get back as soon as possible, because each game presents you an opportunity, especially if you're one of the leaders on this team that is going to be here for the long term. You've got relationships to establish on the floor. You've got goals that you can meet this season that don't revolve around playoffs. So, are they soft? No, I don't think so. I don't think any of these players is legitimately saying, I'm just going to hang back. There's too much pressure to play that you would have to fight through to not play. I just think that the situation with all of the injuries, if it were just one guy and everybody else was playing, and there was a glimmer of hope of playoffs, and that player was slow-footing it, then I would say, all right, there might be an issue. But I think you have to take all of this in context, and I think Bridges is right. He's seeing these guys rehab. They're trying to get back, and we'll see if they get back, and we'll report on it as soon as we can here on the Locked On Hornets podcast. But coming up, I want to go back to the Sicko Satchel because we still have some great questions in there, so that's coming up.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
One from a longtime listener, Keith 802, and this is a great question about a little bit bouncing off of what I was just talking about. What's left to play for? With the way this season is going, is it worth it to wait and see what the full rotation looks like before making any kind of move at the trade deadline? So we'll get to that in just a moment. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in free bets if you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, and those bonus bets are guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there are many different ways to bet, including live same-game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab. Make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, which is the best way to find popular parlays. If you're like me and you got a little bit of decision paralysis when you're scrolling through Netflix, you end up... Producer Katie says my favorite show to watch is Just Scroll Through Netflix. That's my favorite show. So if you have decision paralysis, check out the Parlay Hub. There's much, much more. You can get your bets in on tonight's game against the Sacramento Kings. The Kings are favored by 8. The Hornets are 8-point dogs. Now, look, the Hornets just beat the Kings. 8-point dogs. I don't know. That may be an opportunity there, counting the Hornets out. I think the Hornets, they match up okay with the Kings. They have, at least over the course of the past couple of years. That's a pretty big line for that game. So I don't know. Check it out. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL and one of our favorite sponsors. Check them out. Back here on the Locked On Hornets podcast, thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows like Locked On NBA covering every single league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube, subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. So back into the Sicko Satchel with a question from Keith802. With the way the season is going, this probably ain't happening, but would it be worth it to wait and see what the full rotation looks like before making a move? So very interesting question, and I'm going to take making a move to be making a move at the trade deadline, because that's going to be the first opportunity. That's where the pressure ramps up on playoff teams, where they're looking at situations around the league like the Hornets where there would be an opportunity to sell, and they're going to look to make a deal. And I would say, yes, it could be worth waiting for two reasons. One, it just gives you another opportunity, if you're the ownership group, to figure out who's worth investing in the long term and who needs to move on. And really, I think this revolves around Terry Rozier and PJ Washington. I think the team, I'm pretty confident the team is ready to move on from Gordon Hayward. It'll just be a question of whether you let that contract wash away or whether you wait or whether you find an opportunity to move him for some kind of asset. So for Terry Rozier is the heart and soul of this team. He is the one that is carrying this team right now. He got them that win against Sacramento in Sacramento. He almost was able to will them to an overtime victory against the Chicago Bulls. The Hornets would be in pretty desperate territory without Terry Rozier. And it is, I would say, a player that has improved every single season that he's been a member of the Charlotte Hornets. And so, it would be a decent bet that he would continue to improve as he gets closer to what will be most likely one of his final major signings for his next team, whether that be the Charlotte Hornets or someone else. And so I think you're going to get as good or an even better version of Terry Rozier next season, more improved because he's gotten even more experience. He's already told you that the experience that he gained last season as primary ball handler and fighting through double teams and blitzes the teams were throwing at him because they knew that Terry Rozier was the primary scorer and the primary passer without LaMelo Ball. So he took all of that experience, improved his game. He's able to fight through those blitzes. He's able to make better reads. He's able to get more assists. He's able to balance getting his own shot versus getting other people into a rhythm earlier in a game and getting his shot late. He's able to figure that thing out. And so what is this? So then the question becomes, what is this experience teaching him? What will it cause him to become next season? But the more difficult question to answer is, would he be willing to take those lessons to the bench, right? Because Brandon Miller has also played well this season, and Brandon Miller is the future at the 2-3. And so you want to get him even more minutes, not just next season, certainly next season, but even more minutes this season. Moving Terry Rozier would provide you that opportunity. But do you want to see what this full rotation could do? Here's the other reason, and I think this is the more compelling reason to wait until draft. Because at the trade deadline, there will be some playoff teams that get a little bit desperate. But they're not going to be as desperate as they are in the offseason, or they're not going to be as silly as they are in the offseason when we get around draft time. When you're talking about assets in the draft that are unproven, that are, more valuable to you on the lot than they are off the lot, that's when things start to get crazy. And that's when franchises, they start to really dream big. And they want to make big moves that are going to really get the season off to a great start. Around the trade deadline, I feel like more playoff. There are going to be teams that say, look, regardless of whether we make a deal for Terry Rozier, we're going to the playoffs, okay? So we're picking around the edges. And Terry Rozier will represent one edge that they can pick. there will be other edges. There will be other opportunities. There will be waiver wire opportunities, right? It's not just about making a trade. There will be waivers. And so that presents other opportunities. And I think because of the new collective bargaining agreement, that's less of a tool for some of these major teams, but it still, I think, will be a factor. And so if you wait, I think you're going to generate even more value for Terry Rozier. Now, there is risk involved in that that the Hornets are very familiar with, and that risk is injury. That risk is Terry Rozier has a history of ankle injuries himself, has a history of groin strain injuries that have kept him out for multiple weeks. And so if he were to sustain one of those, and you're risking too that you're not going to get enough wins to really for it to make sense for Terry Rozier to play a lot of minutes to end the season. And so then you're going to have one of those situations where, he's not going to get to close out the year very strong because you're going to be sitting veterans in favor of playing some of these younger guys. So there is risk involved, but I think the reward is that if you wait, you are going to be better able to evaluate which players represent long-term opportunities for you and which players don't. And you haven't had enough opportunity with LaMelo Ball healthy and playing to make those kinds of decisions. I honestly think a decision that they need to start to make, it doesn't have to be made, but something that they should continue to evaluate is Mark Williams going to be a starting center for them in the future? Will he improve his game such, both his shooting and his physicality? Is that going to improve such that he is a lock to be the starting center of the future? I'm not sure that he's a lock yet. I think he represents the best opportunity that the Hornets have had in a very long time, but I don't think that he's a lock yet. And that's why, again, going back to that first segment, I think that's the most disappointing part about him not being available for these games and this lower back injury really hampering, just like the thumb injury did at the end of last season. This is really hampering the team's ability to evaluate a piece that could represent a core piece of your team. So will be very interesting to watch. Great question by Keith there. I've got one more Sicko Satchel question coming up. It's more of a funny one. I also want to preview tonight's game against the Sacramento Kings. That's coming up on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
That question involves what justifies a parade in Charlotte for the Hornets. I will reveal what this listener has given me in terms of options for what justifies a parade. This is truly the sickest of the sick questions that we've gotten, and I've saved the best for last here because it represents the kind of dark hope that the Hornets fans have right now amidst all of these injuries. So can't wait to answer that, plus a preview of tonight's game against the Sacramento Kings. This episode of the Locked On Hornets podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Around New Year's, around the beginning of the year, we get obsessed with how to change ourselves. New Year's resolutions, that kind of thing. Instead of just expanding on what we're already doing right. And maybe, look, here's some examples for you. Maybe you finally organized one part of your space, okay? You got that done. Resolution, check. But maybe you want to get to another. Or maybe you're taking those supplements every morning, check. And now you want to actually eat breakfast too. Well, therapy helps you find your strengths so that you can ditch all of those extreme resolutions that you make around the new year and make changes that stick throughout the entire year. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Celebrate the progress that you've already made. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. That's BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Final segment here on the Locked On Hornets podcast. The Hornets play tonight against Sacramento, part of a 4-game mirror series where they played. It's a palindromic It is at Sacramento, at Chicago. Then they come back home for a 2-game homestand against Chicago and against Sacramento. And then they go back out on the road for 3 games. That's right. They weren't done on the road. You thought they were done on the road for a while. They are not. 3 games. If you look at the upcoming schedule, though, there are some opportunities to get wins, including 2 games against the San Antonio Spurs. One of those was supposed to be on national television, and that got ripped away from the Hornets, but I think understandably Brandon Miller's not even a lock to play at this point if he's not recovered fully from this sickness. And so, Victor Wembanyama versus Brandon Miller, that will be interesting to watch. But it certainly is not going to be the draw necessary, as both of those teams are heading towards possible number 1 pick status again next season. So the Hornets will play the Sacramento Kings tonight. They got an emotional win, and a lot of that thanks to Terry Rozier, who in that last game helped the Hornets break an 11-game losing streak by scoring 34 points on 54% shooting, including 14 points in the decisive fourth quarter, and he added 6 assists, 3 rebounds, 2 blocks, and a steal. An incredible game for Terry Rozier, and he's had a number of those. But I want to zoom in on the fourth quarter scoring, because the Hornets have been one of the better fourth quarter scoring teams, both in terms of efficiency and overall output this season. It's that darn third quarter. It's coming out of that second half that has absolutely killed them. And so the fourth quarter hasn't mattered as much because they've either had to dig themselves out of a major hole, or they've been so far out of it that both teams go to the white flag lineups and the stats are a little bit skewed. But of the games where they have been successful in the fourth quarter, Terry Rozier has typically been a big part of that. In fact, he's really fully replaced what they lost when LaMelo Ball was sidelined, because LaMelo Ball was taking almost 6 shots a game in the fourth quarter in those 14 games that we saw from him early in the season. And if you remember, early in the season, LaMelo was a little rusty, coming off of the ankle fracture that he suffered the previous season that really kept him from ramping up all summer. And so he spent the first 5 or 6 games kind of getting back into a groove, but he would go like first 3 quarters, shooting 2 for 8, 2 for 10, and then he would go into a phone booth and come out and be Superman in the fourth quarter and help get them back into some of those games. So that was LaMelo Ball. LaMelo Ball leaves the lineup again for another ankle injury, and it's up to Terry Rozier to replace that, and he has done that. So LaMelo was taking 5.8 shots per game. Terry now in the fourth quarter, 5.7, and he's doing it at a 50% clip, where LaMelo was doing it at a 53% clip. And then in terms of three-point shooting, LaMelo was 51% from 3 in the fourth quarter. Terry, worse, 43, but not by much. The only better three-point shooter in the fourth quarter, there are a couple. Well, Brandon Miller at 45.9%, Nick Smith Jr. at 53.3%, and Gordon Hayward at 60%, but none of those guys are taking 2.5 attempts. It's all, 1.5. And so he's doing a lot of the shooting. He's doing it efficiently, and the Hornets are scoring in the fourth quarter. And so if a game gets close, you can depend on Terry Rozier, and this game might get close if they're able to keep Sabonis off the boards, where he did crush them, and the entire team did in that last game. 15 offensive rebounds. The Hornets only had 4 offensive rebounds against Sacramento. So I think that's going to be a key in this game. Can they clean up some of the turnovers? That game was sloppy. That both teams were giving each other the opportunity to get back into it, right? The Hornets had 15 turnovers. Sacramento committed 20. And so in this game, you got to think Sacramento remembers that game, and they will clean some things up as well. So can the Hornets respond? Can they clean some things up? Can they get a little bit more physical on the boards? And the Hornets, they cost themselves that game against Chicago because of late miscues, because of turnovers, and because of just not paying attention on defense. Terry Rozier gets back up by Caruso, and then Miles Bridges throws an ill-advised pass into the teeth of a Chicago defense that was good at deflecting. So is Sacramento. They love to turn teams over. They've got De'Aaron Fox, who loves to get out on the break and score easily and get fouled. And so, the Hornets, this is not going to be an easy one. They are not They're not favored in this game. They're an 8-point dog for a reason, but certainly they've matched up well with them in the past, and we will see how it goes, and we'll be back here tomorrow, hopefully with Walker, to give you a full recap of this game. Final question from the Sicko Satchel comes to us courtesy of Casual Hindu, another longtime listener who asked, what justifies a parade in Charlotte for the Hornets at this point? Is it an in-season tournament championship? Would that get a parade? Would it be making it to the Eastern Conference Finals? Would it be not having a major injury for an entire season? Ding, ding, ding. I think it's the final one. Look, if you get through next season and you do not have, I won't even say a major injury. If you can get through next season without having a slate of injuries such that I have to ask the question on this show, are you taking team street clothes or are you taking team available? That was a legitimate question I asked in the last episode, because if you look at it, the Hornets are missing a team that I think could go up and get a win on any given night against any NBA team. They're not going to win a lot of games, but I'll take that starting lineup any given night. And so that's what I think would justify a parade. If they can get through an entire season without looking at the lineup, looking at the injury list and going, that is an NBA starting five, that would be pretty incredible. But if I want to answer this question seriously, I think that you only do a parade for an NBA championship. You have to have standards. As I discussed about the miracle after midnight situation, and that it was an emotional win, it was a highly unlikely win against Sacramento a few nights ago, but it was not a miracle after midnight. We have to hold things to standards. We have to hold the flu game up. We have to put it on a pedestal and say that was an incredible thing, and that's why we call it the flu game. And so if another player happens to have the sniffles and has a great game, we don't call that the flu game. The flu game was the flu game because it had meaning, it had value, and the player that did it had already done some pretty incredible things. And so just like the Hornets have been very reticent to retire a jersey, the only jersey that the Hornets have retired is Bobby Phil's, because Bobby Phil's tragically died while he was a member of the Charlotte Hornets. And that is a very good reason to retire someone's jersey, and something that teams have done in the past for players that have died while a member of the team, a way to honor their memory. Teams don't retire jerseys just because they haven't retired a jersey for a player that has played really well for them. And, you know, I think it has to be both. You've done incredible things for the franchise and you've done incredible things in the context of the NBA, Hall of Fame careers. It's why I think they've gone to this sort of cell thing, where cell meaning like the hexagon shape of a hive. They've honored players through cells throughout the arena. That is not a jersey retirement. It's just a way to say, hey, you did great things for this franchise. When Kemba officially retires from I don't think he's officially retired from the NBA. He's playing over in Europe right now. That's going to be a tough one. I've got to do a little bit more thinking about that because he is unquestionably, when you look at the record books, the best player in franchise history in terms of what he accomplished while he was a member of the Charlotte Hornets. But I don't think he's a Hall of Fame player. And so, you know, is that jersey retirement worthy? I think that's still something that needs a little bit more thought and a little bit more debate, but certainly parades for the NBA championship. Now, if they get to the Eastern Conference Finals, there will be parties, there will be gatherings around the arena. That's the cool thing. That's the exciting thing. There will be watch parties for playoff games. You will have an area outside of the arena that could get a nickname of some kind, just like we saw in Milwaukee and Toronto and those other teams. You will have. I do believe that there is a silent majority, if you will, of fans that are waiting for this team to perform well again, that will not claim ownership over their fandom right now. But if the team were to justify them getting excited again, they will get excited again. And you will see the Hive come alive once again. And if they sustain it, if they sustain playoff success over the course of 2, 3, 4 seasons, then I think you could even get something close to what Charlotte, it won't be exactly what Charlotte had when they opened the Coliseum, because there was context around that. There was a city that was dying to be considered a big city, and they got a franchise, a professional sports franchise. It was a novel thing. You're never going to quite reclaim that. But if you do sneak into the Eastern Conference Finals, if you do become a perennial contender, then I think you will get something approximate to that once again. Maybe not parade, but you'll get something pretty exciting. And that's why we're sickos, because we want that, because we desperately want that, because we see Giannis hugging Mike Budenholzer after winning a championship, and we get the goosies, we get the willies, we get the tear coming down from one eye, because we want that so desperately for the team that we followed for so long. And we'll continue to follow it here, and we'll follow this season because there is stuff to play for. There are things that they could accomplish this season that you could, it's the meme where you hit the tiny domino and it leads to the big domino. There are things that they could do, small things that they could accomplish this season that could lead to that big domino falling, which would not even a championship, just a threat to win a playoff series, something they haven't done in 22 years. That would be the big domino at this point. So stick around. We will continue to cover it here on Locked On Hornets every day. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, go Hornets, go America. Let's swarm Charlotte.